She trusted him with her life, and he left her to die in the most merciless place imaginable. But fate had other plans. And what happened next will take you through betrayal, survival, and a love that no one saw coming. This isn't just a story of loss. It's one of unexpected power and a throne no one believed she could ever reach. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story and where you're watching from and why you're following this reading. The fine rain fell over the Clythorn Desert, turning the normally parched sand into dark, wet patches. Baron Cedric of Dunhold guided his horse along a narrow path, his expression severe as he pulled his pregnant wife by the hand. Lady Elswyn, a woman of 40 with striking features and uncommon beauty, struggled to keep up with her husband's determined pace, her swollen belly making each step increasingly difficult. "Cedric, please slow down," she pleaded, her breath labored. "The child. I can feel it stirring more strongly today." Her husband of 3 years did not turn to acknowledge her discomfort. His eyes, as cold as the blade of his sword, remained fixed on the desolate landscape ahead. The heavy fur cloak around his shoulders was adorned with the emblem of House Dunhold, a falcon clutching a serpent. At 42, Baron Cedric cut an imposing figure with his broad shoulders and neatly trimmed beard flecked with silver. "We're nearly there," he replied, his voice flat and emotionless. "The spiritual retreat I spoke of is just beyond those dunes." Elswyn looked around in confusion. The barren wasteland offered no sign of shelter, no indication of the spiritual haven Cedric had promised when they'd departed from their manor 3 days prior. Only endless sand, scattered rocks, and the occasional twisted shrub met her searching gaze. "I see nothing, my lord," she said, shivering despite the heavy layers of her traveling gown. The fine wool and leather of her garments were now damp, with rain clinging uncomfortably to her skin. "Surely this cannot be the place you described." Cedric finally stopped, dismounting with practiced ease. His boots sank slightly into the wet sand as he turned to face his wife. For a brief moment, something akin to regret flickered across his features before being replaced by stony resolve. "This is where you'll remain, Elswyn." His words hung in the air between them, carried away by the wind that had begun to pick up, bringing with it the scent of rain and desolation. "I don't understand," she whispered, one hand instinctively moving to protect her unborn child. "What do you mean?" Cedric's jaw tightened. "You were never supposed to conceive. The midwife assured me you couldn't bear children." The truth dawned on Elswyn with crushing clarity. Her husband had married her for her family's connections and modest wealth, never intending to father an heir with her. Now that she was with child, she had become an inconvenience, an obstacle to whatever new alliance he sought to forge. "The child is yours," she said, her voice stronger now despite the fear gripping her heart. "Your blood, your legacy, a legacy that would interfere with my plans," he replied coldly. "Lady Mara of Halford awaits my courtship. Her father's armies would double our influence in the northern territories." Elswyn took a step back, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You would leave your pregnant wife in the desert to die? For political advantage?" "You'll be remembered as a noble woman who perished from childbirth complications," Cedric stated, already turning back to his horse. "I've already spread word of your failing health. No one will question your passing." "Cedric!" Elswyn lunged forward, grasping his arm. "If not for me, then for your child." "Please!" For a heartbeat he hesitated. Then, without warning, he shoved a small leather pouch into her hands. "Water. Enough for a day. What happens after is in the hands of the gods." With that, he mounted his horse in one fluid motion. The rain was falling harder now, almost obscuring his figure as he turned his steed northward. "The desert claims all who enter unprepared," he called over his shoulder. "It will leave no evidence of my deception." Elswyn watched in stunned silence as her husband rode away, deliberately weaving a complex path to erase their tracks. The realization of her situation crashed over her like a wave. Alone, pregnant, and abandoned in one of the most inhospitable regions of the kingdom. A contraction, sharp and unexpected, doubled her over. She gasped, clutching her belly as pain radiated through her body. Not now, she thought desperately. Please, not now. As the silhouette of Cedric disappeared into the rain-drenched horizon, Elswyn fell to her knees on the wet sand. Her long auburn hair, once meticulously braided and adorned with silver threads, now hung in damp, tangled waves around her face. The intricate embroidery of her traveling dress, designs of falcons and serpents that had once filled her with pride, now seemed to mock her with their association to the man who had just sentenced her to death. Yet even as tears mingled with raindrops on her cheeks, a fierce resolve began to take root in her heart. She had not survived the plague that took her parents, had not endured a loveless marriage to a cold and calculating man, only to perish in this God's forsaken wasteland. "We will survive this," she whispered to her unborn child, feeling another contraction building. "We must." Night was falling rapidly, the last light of day fading from the sky. Without shelter, without fire, Elswyn knew her chances were slim. Still, she forced herself to stand, to take one painful step after another toward a rocky outcropping in the distance. Perhaps there she might find some protection from the elements. The wind howled around her, carrying sand that stung her face and hands. Each step became a battle of will against pain and exhaustion. Her fine leather boots, never meant for such terrain, were already beginning to tear at the seams. When the next contraction hit, stronger than before, Elswyn could no longer remain standing. She collapsed at the base of a large dune, her vision blurring as pain washed over her in relentless waves. In the growing darkness, with no stars to guide her and no hope of rescue, Lady Elswyn of Dunhold closed her eyes, one hand still protectively. Cradling her belly, the child within her kicked strongly, as if protesting their fate. In that moment, Elswyn made a silent vow. If by some miracle they survived, she would ensure her child grew up knowing strength, compassion, and justice, everything Baron Cedric of Dunhold lacked. As consciousness began to slip away, the last thing Elswyn heard was the distant sound of hoofbeats, though whether real or imagined, she could not tell. A royal detachment of King Alaric's men traversed the unforgiving terrain of the Clythorn Desert, their leather armor and thick fur cloaks bearing the emblem of Thalwyn, a crowned wolf with amber eyes. Commander Thorn, a battle-hardened veteran of 52 winters, led the party of 12 soldiers through the shifting sands, tracking a merchant caravan that had gone missing 3 days prior. "We've found nothing but sand and more sand for leagues," grumbled Roderick, the youngest of the soldiers at 41. "The caravan must have taken another route." Commander Thorn's weathered face remained impassive as he surveyed the horizon. The rain had stopped at dawn, but dark clouds still lingered overhead, threatening to unleash another downpour. "The king's orders were clear," Thorn replied, his voice carrying the weight of decades of loyal service. "We search until we find evidence of the caravan's fate. Too many valuable goods and royal correspondence were entrusted to those merchants." The men continued their arduous journey, their horses struggling against the wet sand that clung to their hooves. As they crested a particularly steep dune, Gareth, the party's scout, suddenly raised his hand, signaling the others to halt. "Commander, there's something, or someone, ahead," he called out, pointing toward a dark shape at the base of a distant dune. Thorn squinted against the harsh glare of sunlight breaking through the clouds. "Could be a desert predator's kill. Approach with caution." The soldiers advanced slowly, hands resting on the pommels of their swords. As they drew closer, the shape resolved into the crumpled form of a woman, her fine garments soaked and covered in sand. "By the gods," whispered Thorn as they encircled her. "She's with child." Elswyn lay unconscious, her face ashen beneath streaks of sand and dried tears. Her hand still rested protectively over her swollen belly, and despite her dire condition, there was a dignity about her that struck the men into momentary silence. Gareth knelt beside her, pressing 2 fingers to her neck. "She lives, but barely. Her pulse is weak." "Look at her clothing," observed Roderick, gesturing toward the intricate embroidery visible beneath the grime. "She's nobility. What in 7 hells is a high-born lady doing alone in the Clythorn?" Thorn dismounted, removing his cloak in one fluid motion before wrapping it around Elswyn's still form. That's a question for when she wakes. If she wakes. For now, our duty is clear. We bring her to Highwin. The king's castle? Gareth raised an eyebrow. That's a 3-day journey, Commander. In her condition. Look at her belly, man! Thorn cut in sharply. That child could come any moment. We need Lady Winna's skills. Without further discussion, Thorn carefully lifted Elswyn's limp form, noting with concern how light she felt despite her advanced pregnancy. He mounted his steed with practiced ease, positioning her securely before him. Roderick, ride ahead to alert the castle. The rest of you, form a protective circle. We move as swiftly as caution allows. The journey back to Highwin Castle was fraught with tension. Twice they had to stop when Elswyn stirred, moaning in pain as contractions racked her body. By the time the imposing stone walls of King Alaric's stronghold came into view, the sun was setting on the second day of their return journey. Lady Winna, the royal healer, waited at the gates, her 60 years of experience evident in the calm efficiency with which she directed the soldiers to carry Elswyn to the healer's chambers. She's been laboring intermittently for at least a day, Winna observed, her skilled hands examining Elswyn. It's a miracle both she and the child still live. The birthing room was quickly prepared. Warm water, clean linens, and various tinctures arranged precisely as Winna required. Outside the chamber, Commander Thorn paced restlessly, awaiting news he could deliver to his king. King Alaric of Thalwyn was holding court when Thorn was finally summoned to the Great Hall. At 40 years of age, Alaric cut an imposing figure on his throne. His dark hair, streaked with silver at the temples, was pulled back from a face known for both its handsome features and the intensity of its expressions. The king's clothing, layers of rich leather, fur, and dark fabrics with subtle gold threading, spoke of wealth tempered by practicality. Commander, Alaric's deep voice echoed through the hall as he dismissed the petitioners before him with a gesture. I'm told you found something unexpected in the Clythorn. Thorn bowed deeply. Indeed, your majesty. A noblewoman, abandoned and with child. Lady Winna attends her now as she gives birth. A murmur rippled through the remaining courtiers. Alaric leaned forward, his brow furrowing. Abandoned, you say? Explain. There were no signs of a camp, your majesty. No dead horse, no companions. Just the lady, alone at the base of a dune. Her garments bear the emblem of House Dunhold. Alaric's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Baron Cedric's house. Yes, sire, though we found no trace of the Baron himself. Before Alaric could respond, the doors to the great hall swung open, and Lady Winna entered, her simple gray gown stained with blood and birthing fluids. Your Majesty, she called, dispensing with formalities in her urgency. The lady has delivered a son. Both live, though barely. She asks to speak with you. A hush fell over the hall. It was unusual, unprecedented even, for the king to attend a stranger's birthing bed. Yet something in Winna's tone suggested this was no ordinary request. Alaric rose from his throne, his movement deliberate and measured. Very well. The healer's chamber was warm and dimly lit by several oil lamps. The scent of medicinal herbs hung heavy in the air as Alaric entered, his tall frame seeming to fill the modest space. On a bed against the far wall lay Elswyn, her face pale but composed, a small bundle cradled in her arms. As Alaric approached, Elswyn attempted to rise, but he gestured for her to remain still. Rest, my lady, you've endured enough. Elswyn's eyes, a striking shade of green that even exhaustion couldn't dim, met his without wavering. Your Majesty is kind. I am Lady Elswyn of Dunhold, and I owe you and your men my life, and that of my son. Her voice, though weak, carried a quiet dignity that caught Alaric's attention. This was not a woman broken by her ordeal, but one somehow strengthened by it. What brought you to the Clythorn Desert, Lady Elswyn? He asked, studying her face carefully. It is no place for anyone, least of all a woman about to give birth. A shadow passed over Elswyn's features. I was brought there, your Majesty, and left to die. My husband had other plans that did not include this child or me. Alaric's expression darkened. Baron Cedric did this? He did. Elswyn glanced down at her newborn son, who slept peacefully against her chest. He told me it was to be a spiritual retreat. Instead, it was to be our tomb. The king's hands clenched at his sides, his knuckles whitening. Such treachery against one's own blood was abhorrent to him. In that moment, something shifted in Alaric, something that went beyond duty or justice. "You and your son are under my protection now, Lady Elswyn," he declared, his voice low but firm. "When you are stronger, we will discuss what is to be done about Baron Cedric." Elswyn looked up, surprise flickering across her face. "You would extend such protection to strangers, Your Majesty?" "I would extend justice to those denied it," Alaric replied simply, "and sanctuary to those who have shown remarkable courage in the face of betrayal." For the first time since her rescue, Elswyn's carefully maintained composure cracked. A single tear slid down her cheek as she nodded her gratitude. "What will you name him?" Alaric asked, his gaze moving to the infant. Elswyn looked down at her son, his tiny face peaceful in sleep, unaware of the perilous journey that had brought him into the world. "Edrin," she said softly. "It means survivor in the old tongue." Alaric nodded, a rare smile briefly softening his features. "A fitting name." As the king turned to leave, he paused at the doorway, looking back at the woman who had defied death itself to bring life into the world. Something stirred within him, an emotion he couldn't immediately identify, or perhaps chose not to. Rest. "Well, Lady Elswyn of Thalwyn," he said, the slight change in title not going unnoticed by either of them. As the door closed behind him, Elswyn held her son closer, whispering promises of safety and love. For the first time since Cedric had abandoned them to the merciless desert, she allowed herself to hope. In his private chambers that night, King Alaric stood by the window, gazing out at his kingdom. The image of Elswyn's unwavering green eyes stayed with him, challenging something within that had long remained dormant. Two parallel stories, his and hers, had unexpectedly converged, and Alaric couldn't shake the feeling that nothing would be quite the same again. 2 weeks had passed since Lady Elswyn's dramatic arrival at Highwind Castle. The spring sun filtered through the leaded glass windows of her chambers, casting warm patterns across the stone floor. King Alaric had ordered she be given rooms in the eastern wing, quarters typically reserved for distinguished guests of the crown, not refugees found half dead in the desert. Elswyn sat in a high-backed chair near the window, her son Edrin sleeping peacefully in a wooden cradle beside her. Her fingers absently traced the fine wolf embroidery on her new gown, clothing provided by the king's own seamstresses to replace her ruined Dunhold garments. The dark blue fabric complemented her auburn hair, which had regained its luster under proper care. A soft knock at the door broke her contemplation. "Enter," she called, straightening her posture instinctively. Lady Winna stepped inside, her gray hair neatly braided and coiled at the nape of her neck. The royal healer carried a small wooden box containing various tinctures and salves. "Durim, are you feeling today, my lady?" Winna asked, setting her supplies on a nearby table. "Stronger," Elswyn replied with a small smile. "Thanks to your ministrations." Winna nodded approvingly as she examined Elswyn, checking her pulse and inspecting the color of her eyes. "Your recovery has been remarkable. Most women would still be bedridden after such an ordeal." "I cannot afford the luxury of prolonged weakness," Elswyn said, her voice quiet but firm. "My son needs me strong." The healer's weathered face softened as she glanced at the sleeping infant. "He thrives, a fighter like his mother." As Winna prepared to leave, another knock sounded, this one more authoritative. Both women turned as the heavy oak door swung open to reveal King Alaric himself, dressed in layers of rich leather and dark fabrics with subtle wolf motifs woven throughout. Without his crown or formal court attire, he appeared slightly less intimidating, though no less regal. "Your Majesty," Elswyn attempted to rise, but Alaric gestured for her to remain seated. "Please, Lady Elswyn, conserve your strength." His deep voice filled the room as his eyes moved to the cradle. "I see the young heir to House Dunhold rests peacefully." Winna bowed and quietly excused herself, leaving the king and Elswyn alone. Alaric approached the cradle, studying the infant with undisguised curiosity. "He has your coloring," he observed. "And his father's chin, unfortunately," Elswyn replied, a hint of bitterness creeping into her tone. She immediately composed herself. "Forgive me, Your Majesty. It is unbecoming to speak ill of my husband." Alaric's expression hardened as he turned from the cradle to face her directly. "A man who abandons his pregnant wife in the desert forfeits the right to courteous speech, my lady." His bluntness surprised her. In the formal world of nobility, such directness was rare, especially from a king. "May I?" Alaric gestured to a chair opposite hers. "Of course, Your Majesty. It is your castle, after all." A flicker of amusement crossed his face as he sat. "Indeed it is, though I find myself spending more time in these guest quarters than I have in years." It was true. Since her arrival, the king had visited almost daily, ostensibly to check on her recovery. At first, the visits had been brief and formal, but gradually they had lengthened, evolving into conversations that ranged from court politics to philosophy. "The court must find it curious," Elswyn ventured, watching his reaction carefully. Alaric's mouth curved slightly. "The court finds everything I do curious. It is their primary occupation." He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "I came today with news. Baron Cedric has publicly announced your death." Elswyn felt her chest tighten despite herself. How convenient for him. "Indeed. According to the missives we've intercepted, you perished from complications during childbirth while on a spiritual retreat. The child supposedly died with you." She nodded slowly, processing this information. "And now he is free to pursue Lady Mara of Halford without impediment." Alaric studied her face intently. "You knew of his plans?" "He told me as much when he left me to die," she replied, her voice steady despite the pain the memory evoked. Political alliances were always more important to Cedric than family ties. The king's jaw tightened, a muscle working in his cheek. "I could have him arrested for treason. Abandoning one's wife, especially the mother of one's heir, violates sacred laws of both crown and faith." Elswyn considered this, then shook her head. "And what would that accomplish, Your Majesty?" "It would expose his treachery, yes, but it would also reveal that I am alive and vulnerable." "You fear he would try again?" "I know he would." Her green eyes met his without wavering. "Cedric cannot afford loose ends, especially ones that might interfere with his ambitions." Alaric nodded slowly, impressed by her pragmatic assessment. "Most nobles, particularly noblewomen, would have demanded immediate justice, regardless of consequences. Then for now you remain dead to the world beyond Highwind's walls," he declared. "I've already instructed my council and staff to maintain absolute discretion regarding your presence here." "You are most generous, Your Majesty." Alaric waved away her gratitude. "It is merely justice. But this brings me to my second purpose for visiting today." He straightened in his chair. "I cannot in good conscience keep you hidden away in these chambers indefinitely. You deserve a place, a purpose." Elswyn tilted her head slightly, intrigued. "What did you have in mind?" "I would like to offer you a position in my court, officially as a cultural advisor from the Southern Territories, where few at court have connections. Your true identity would remain known only to my inner circle." The offer caught her by surprise. "A cultural advisor? But I have no diplomatic training." "Yet you possess something more valuable, intelligence tempered by experience." Alaric gestured toward Edrin's cradle. "And a perspective that few in my council can provide." Elswyn considered the proposal carefully. Being integrated into court life would certainly be preferable to continued isolation, but it also carried risks. "And my son?" "He would be recognized as your child, of course, though his paternity would remain undisclosed. A widow's son from the South, nothing more." The thoughtfulness of the arrangement touched her. "You've given this considerable attention, Your Majesty." Something in Alaric's expression softened momentarily. "I find myself invested in your well-being, Lady Elswyn. More than duty alone might dictate." The admission hung between them, neither fully acknowledged nor dismissed, Elswyn felt her heartbeat quicken slightly, though she maintained her composure. "Then I accept your offer with gratitude," she said simply. Alaric nodded, seemingly pleased with her response. "Excellent. You'll be formally introduced at the solstice feast 3 days hence." He rose from his chair. "Lady Winna tells me you're strong enough for short walks. Perhaps tomorrow you might join me in the royal gardens? They're quite private. Few courtiers venture there." "I would like that very much," Elswyn replied, surprised by how genuinely she meant it. After the king departed, Elswyn moved to the window, gazing out at the sprawling castle grounds. In just 2 weeks her world had transformed completely. From the brink of death to the inner circle of a king, it seemed almost too fantastical to believe. Yet even as she settled into this unexpected new chapter, whispers had already begun to circulate throughout Highwind Castle. Servants exchanged theories about the mysterious southern widow who had captured the king's attention. Ladies-in-waiting speculated about her unusual beauty and composure. And in darker corners, those with political ambitions watched with growing concern as Alaric visited her chambers with increasing frequency. By the evening of the solstice feast, the entire court buzzed with anticipation to meet the woman who had somehow penetrated the typically reserved king's inner circle. Elswyn stood before a polished metal mirror, examining her reflection in the new gown provided for the occasion, an elegant creation of deep emerald velvet with subtle silver, embroidery that mimicked Thalwyn's royal emblem. "You look every inch a queen," Lady Winna commented as she entered with Edrin in her arms. Elswyn turned sharply. "Mind your words, Winna. Such talk is dangerous." The older woman merely smiled, unperturbed. "I've served 3 kings of Thalwyn, child. I know the look of a monarch captivated, whether he admits it to himself or not. His Majesty has shown me kindness, nothing more," Elswyn insisted, though a warmth crept up her neck. "As you say." Winna handed Edrin to his mother. "But kindness from Alaric is rarer than diamonds from a goat's behind. The court knows this well." Despite herself, Elswyn laughed, the first genuine laugh since her rescue. She gazed down at her son, now almost a month old, his curious eyes already tracking movements and faces. "What strange fate brought us here, little one?" she whispered. "And what stranger path lies ahead?" As if in answer, Edrin's tiny hand closed around her finger, with surprising strength. In that simple gesture, Elswyn found her resolve. Whatever court intrigues awaited, whatever whispers followed her entrance into King Alaric's world, she would face them with the same determination that had kept her alive in the desert. She was no longer merely the discarded wife of Baron Cedric. She was Lady Elswyn of Thalwyn now, advisor to the king, mother to a survivor, and perhaps, though she dared not yet admit it even to herself, something more. As Elswyn begins to find moments of safety within the king's walls, the storm she thought she'd escaped may be closer than she believes. Whispers echo through the court, and a single gaze during the royal banquet will shift the course of her fate. Just as trust begins to blossom, an unseen danger is already watching her next step. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Click here and watch the next episode.